Hi, folks. I'm John Kraska with EveryLibrary. Jennifer and Will invited me to put together a little bit of a, well, homework's the wrong word for it, but at least some pre-work, if you will, for our conversation on the 25th of June with the between EveryLibrary and the Massachusetts Library Association's Legislative Committee. They invited me to put together some thinking around some work that we've been doing at EveryLibrary that's a little bit more theoretical around the difference between advocacy and activism. Mainly because the issues around advocacy and activism are often commingled and conflated and confused with each other, and so we're not very effective as organizations because we're not using the proper strategy to get our advocacy, which is a long game, done, or respond quickly to either opportunity or crisis through activism. I want to share with you a little bit today around our approach here at Every Library and the Every Library Institute around how we work within both of those spheres. There's two components to every library, and if we're looking at ways to help support the Massachusetts Library Association's agenda, I want to share with you our capabilities a little bit here at Every Library and the Every Library Institute. Every library itself is a 501c4 organization. It's a political action committee. That means that we can work on, the one day of the year that's very critical for libraries, whether it's a public library, a school library, even academic libraries. The day that funding decisions are made, it might be a town hall, it might be a voter approved measure, it might be a budget for a city council, county commission, county supervisors. It might be a moment in the state legislature or even Congress. The work that we do on politics is all pro bono. It is all for free. We do all of our work pro bono and for free for libraries because we are a donor supported organization. We're not for hire on the political side. When we work in a community, it might be in one zip code, it might be across the state, it might be again around national issues of importance for libraries. We do all that work for free and pro bono in order to do two things. One is to focus on best practices. If we're getting paid, and there's consultants out there who get paid, and I get that, that's cool. Our model's different. We want to put out a value proposition to the public and say, if you think that we should have a political action committee for libraries, let's do it. But the approach with us is best practices is what we want to be able to do for that particular place. And the place that is the library or the particular school district, the particular terroir. I mean, every community is a little weird. Every community is different. There's no such thing as a toolkit. Anybody who tells you there's a toolkit for this kind of work, I think they're misguided. The other work that we do is through our. Oh, I'm sorry. And the second reason is that we want to put a firewall because of um, being donor supported. We do not want to let any accusations happen that a public library, for example, is using public money to advance a negotiation with the city council or community to pass a measure. All right. The other part of our organization is the EveryLibrary Institute. That is our 501c3. That's our traditional nonprofit. It is intended to be a public policy, tax policy, and education policy think tank. We have a research agenda around what voters believe and what politicians believe about libraries. We do training programs a lot of the time for state libraries or state library associations. We spend a lot of time in coalition work that's broader than just libraries. Because libraries intersect so many different parts of society and library organizations tend to be siloed, we would like to break that paradigm. The work that we do at Every Library Institute and Every Library as a political action committee is not commingled with its funds. In fact, we've got very different we have different bank accounts, we have different boards, we have different physical addresses. Now, granted, one of them is my house and one of them is a PO box, but we want to make sure that funders understand that when you give to the 501c4, the Political Action Committee, it's going to those particular means or those particular ends. And if you're going to give to the C3, or if you're going to support us with a grant, or you're going to hire us for a particular consulting service, it's not going to commingle. And I want to let you know about both of our aspects because there are times with activism and there are times with advocacy where you might have to be on the political side. And there are other times where it's more about, well, let me get into this in just a second, but more about sort of education and orientation. And it is appropriate to have different kinds of legal structures and different kinds of organizations because the form of those organizations allows you to function in different ways. Okay, so like I said, some concepts here for a little while around theory of advocacy and theory of activism, because what we're trying to accomplish with the work that we're doing on both the C4 side and the C3 side, the EveryLibrary Political Action Committee and our institute, in partnership with state library organizations like MLA and local libraries when they're on the ballot, or school library communities when there's a crisis or a challenge or an opportunity. I want to go through the differences here, because if we are going to work together in some substantial ways, it's important to understand the frameworks. Our theory of advocacy and our theory of activism starts with the idea, first off, that they are distinct and different from each other, that advocacy and activism are separate. They're co-equal. They're in sometimes parallel processes. Sometimes they're in sequence. Sometimes it's just one but not the other. But the techniques well, too often library organizations, library associations conflate these principles, mush them all together. It diffuses the focus. It minimizes the potential impacts. Understanding the differences is what I want to spend a little bit of time with you on today. And one of the big things is how to help support your legislative, your regulatory, your funding agenda using the right kind of tools, the right kind of techniques, the right kind of, well, long game, short game. Advocacy. Our theory of advocacy really starts that with the concept that advocacy is a process oriented and relationship focused approach to understanding through an exploration together between your organization and another organization, your organization and an allied group, a group of stakeholders, an elected official, if we like them, a politician if we don't, a funder, that's a grant maker, a relationship building opportunity that might be unilateral or multilateral, perhaps in a coalition. This exploration of our shared values framework, exploration of a shared values framework that purposefully aligns through this exploration, through this understanding of why are we both focused on a particular population? Why are we both focused on a particular place that we call home? The purposeful alignment around mission, ways to realize a common vision, again, about people or about place. A lot of the time, advocacy in libraries is like we have to tell a story. We have to tell a story and then we have to get active. And we have to tell a story and get active and maybe wear some T-shirts or have a petition or do something that's going to really get in front of a policymaker and demand change. Our feelings here at EveryLibrary and our lived experience over doing hundreds of library ballot measures and supports for legitimate stakeholders, whether it's a state library organization or a state library, a school library community, is that if the advocacy framework that you start with assumes an adversarial situation, it's not an advocacy situation. It's a real problem. Because again, if advocacy is focused on building partnerships, creating relationships, it might be unilateral or multilateral with a bunch of different organizations that are aligning values, that are understanding each other's mission, that are coming together for a reason that is a shared vision. It doesn't start with storming barricades or putting on T-shirts or floating position papers. It's, well, education first and foremost. Right now, there are a lot of organizations that care about the same people libraries serve, care about the same students, care about the same communities, care about the same place, that have no idea what you're doing. No offense, they have no idea what you're doing. The education about what our library is capable of today, it's the cocktail party problem for any library worker or librarian. Oh, you work at the library? I thought everything was on the internet. No, it's not all on the internet. Let me take a deep breath. It's not all on the internet. Let me tell you all about it. Oh, do people still read books? I thought all e-books took over. What do you do all day? You read? There's a lot. The last frame of reference for many people who are not users of the library was their high school experience or their grade school experience, or they drive by, they see the parking lot's full, and they think everything's awesome. The first component of advocacy, if we understand that it's about a potentially shared value system, a potential common mission, a potential vision for our community or for the future of a group of people we care about, starts with education to them about what we're capable of. is they haven't been paying attention. And yet they are values aligned, perhaps. They're on a common cause with us. They have a common concern. So then after we educate, how do we have to then orient them not just to the institution, but to who we are as librarians and library workers. And when I say we here, forgive me, I'm not a librarian myself, but the all you all on the call here. Who are librarians and library workers today? That orientation and that education establishes, well, two things. One is it teaches people who are themselves engaged information that says maybe we can do something together, and it establishes your bona fides as the experts in librarianship and library work, while they themselves are experts in their particular domains as well. From moving from education into and orientation, though, has a very necessary next step in advocacy, which is a moment of ideation. We tend in library advocacy trainings from other organizations, not every library, to say that what you have to do is tell a story and then somebody will fix your problems for you. If we can go and tell a good story to an elected official, somebody in the legislature, then they'll fix our problem for us. When it actually has to be around co-creation of the solutions. That educating them about how we are on a common mission. We have a common set of values, orienting them to your capabilities and your interests and your integrity as librarians and library workers, and then saying, okay, what could a shared solution to those problems look like? Is it a policy solution? Is it legislative? Is it regulatory? Is it funding? Is it a bit of PR? Is it an alignment around marketing and outreach? Is it co-locating services? What's the ideation? There's a lot of places to explore right now, but advocacy uh, assumes there's an opportunity to collaborate and not an adversarial environment. By ideating together, we decide together with our partner or coalition partners, either unilaterally, sorry, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Multilateral is many, unilateral is singular. That's what I'm thinking of. We come together and say, what could it look like? And then part of the advocacy conversation is what resources do we need in place in order to collaborate with each other? What resources do we need to do this work? Is it policy? Is it budgetary? Is it staffing? Is it facilities? What do we need then becomes a shared solution. And this is where it moves from a situation where we're simply telling a story to somebody saying, we do great work at the library. Look, we help somebody learn how to read. Don't you believe that we should exist? To a situation where we are on a shared path together to help those kids, those seniors, those people looking for work, this community that we both call home. But then what changes it from simply having a chat with somebody who runs another organization in town or staffs an agency or is a stakeholder in a big group is the activation step. It is not a sales cycle to take people through education, orientation, ideation, identification into activation. It is a moment of consent. It is a moment of co-creation. It is a moment where the permission to do this says we're both committed to the collaboration. And I'm not talking about programmatic partnerships here, folks. I'm talking about something as committed to the collaboration of, yes, we would like to advance some legislation that sets up a regulatory environment. Yes, we would like to change the budget in a positive way to make sure that the librarians in schools and in public libraries and academic libraries have the funding they need to succeed. It is activation of a set of values that would otherwise be offended by the shortfalls that you've identified. This is not storming barricades. This is not wearing T-shirts. This is not storytelling with a hope. It is a plan to talk with folks who run the rest of society and go in common cause with them in order to fix the solutions, or sorry, to provide solutions and fix problems. All right. This is our approach at EveryLibrary. On advocacy, that's one thing. On activism, it's another. Let me share with you about this for a moment. We look at activism in a very different lens than advocacy. Activism is a short moment in time. It might happen frequently, it might happen infrequently, but it is strident action as opposed to the long game of relationship building. It is strident action that expects a change because it's asking for a change. It's short. It is focused on values system the same way that advocacy is. It is focused on identity as well, about like who are we together? We're stronger. A small group of people can change the world. Those messages are intended to move people who are otherwise unaware of the situation, or they're inactive perhaps about an issue. A lot of advocacy and training conflates um, relationship building with and partnerships and coalitions with the idea that somebody's going to speak on your behalf, or that we have to get the parents involved, we have to get the stakeholders involved, we have to have an action happen. They have to be pulled apart. Activism moves people who would, after something is over, say to you, if I had only known, I would have helped. If I'd only known, I would have helped is the death knell for a lot of library campaigns because, well, otherwise unaware people, otherwise inactive people about the issues or ideas, moving them from saying that, well, we have a crisis in our community, or we have an opportunity in our community, into close alignment and identification. That's the principles of activism. That's actually where you have the t-shirt, you storm the barricades, you hug the library, you have the placards, you do the petition. And I'm going to describe a little bit of the differences here. Activism is itself, well, first off, activism has to be focused on your own enlightened self-interests. Um, we have a problem in library land sometimes where, or the library world sometimes, where we say we want somebody else to advocate on our behalf, or we don't want to be seen asking for what we need because then we look greedy, or we don't want to be seen even doing the work that we're doing because that's not our disposition as people who work in libraries or support libraries. And yet activism requires your own enlightened self-interest to be there legitimately, and an active voice to be employed, because without that, it's basically an environment where all you have is some kind of hope. Activism is based in a shared values framework because it's a short activity, it's a quick activity, it's an urgent activity. The shared values in a crisis are offended. The shared values between you, the library stakeholders, and other people in the community who should also care. If your shared value system is offended by this crisis, they're going to cut the library's budget. How dare they? Or it is affirmed. Oh, there is an opportunity right now for us to pass legislation. We need you to act now and contact Senator so-and-so and Representative so-and-so because our value system about how we should behave as a community is about to be supported, and we don't want to lose that opportunity. It's focused on a shared identity, and I'm not talking about identity politics here. That's pernicious. What I'm talking about here is an identity that is essentially one of party and participation, and it's intended, activism is intended to not be transactional. It's intended to build community. So if somebody does something for you, that's awful nice of them. But if they do it with you again and again and again, we have ourselves a cohort of people whose value system is known, that we are aligned, and we are generous and humble in our asks. It has integrity, activism does. If you see an organization that is talking out both sides of its mouth, nobody wants to be part of it. The honesty of the motivation behind activism and the authenticity of the goals, it doesn't have to be winnable, mind you. It has to be a legitimate try, though. Activism has to be willing to direct activity. You have to have an ask in activism. Advocacy has a shared values framework and a vision for the future and ways to co-create. And there is an ask at the end in terms of aligning resources that could be about, policy or budgets or whatever. But activism is using verbs. It uses verbs and it says things in the first person, perhaps singular, perhaps first person plural. I do this work at the library. We need these particular resources. Can you please help us by doing a certain action? Contacting Congress, legislature, city council, voting in a particular way? Can you help us by donating or volunteering? Can you align yourself, your values, and your identity in order to make this thing happen? We can build community in the process. It's not. It's not passive. Also, activism is intended to organize supporters. It identifies people as supporters. It cultivates them, and with the tools in place, empowers them to get the work done, not in your stead, not on your behalf, but alongside you in that shared values and shared identity framework. I hope that resonates in some ways. I really do. At Every Library and the Every Library Institute, we spend a lot of time working on both of those kinds of techniques. The advocacy approach, that is that long game, that power building opportunity, and the activism that is a little bit of like a twitch, muscle. If it makes sense to you, I want to keep talking with you for a few more minutes here about some other theoreticals, because if this makes sense to you, if you're like, well, that's really interesting, we should be doing something along those lines, we might be a good partner for you here at Every Library. If it doesn't, that's cool too. It would be good to know why, because I'm always looking to make sure we get this right. Oh, my apologies for using somebody else's hashtag. I give this particular set of slides a Nebraska Library Association. How exciting. Oh, also, I did give some of this to you at MLA a couple weeks ago. So, but stick with me because there's going to be more. All right. Sorry. Political frames. I want to talk about some assumptions here and some of the theory that we have as Every Library. Basically, it boils down to the fact that political decisions, all decisions for library funding, are political in nature. There's no other way around it because it's about how do we tax ourselves. It might be directly through a town hall, through a city, through a legislature. It might be by proxy through a school commission or school board, school committee, forgive me, school committee. It might be direct or indirect democracy, but 99 out of 100 times, it's a political conversation. So we need to understand the frames about politics that color and influence how people respond, because a misunderstood or malunderstood either advocacy campaign or activism campaign for that matter um, goes really haywire if you don't understand how people are wired to listen and you don't work on messaging for each of the political idioms. There's three narratives that are basically in play in the United States of America these days. There's kind of a fourth one here. There's progressives, conservatives, and libertarians. Sure, NPR, Fox News, and the live local news at 10 or 11 at night. The fourth one is kind of a Trumpist approach, and no offense, it's a little bit of like burn it down. I'm not really working on that one right now. We're working on mainstream politics here. But the theory here is not Every Library. We're stealing it wholesale from a book called The Three Languages of Politics by a fellow named Arnold Kling. He's a fellow at the Libertarian Cato Institute. It's a fantastic book. He talks about the stories that we like to tell ourselves and the narratives that we have, whether it's a hero narrative about ourselves or sort of a villain narrative about somebody else's political perspective. And I'm bringing this up at the beginning of our potential relationship because a lot of the times in libraries, we are fairly progressive, though our institutions are extremely conservative. And our approach to government, though, in a weird way, is actually kind of libertarian because we're really looking to lower barriers. But we have to consider our own vocabulary. The progressive idiom, the progressive narrative. Again, it's a hero and a villain. My heroes are people who have stood up for the underprivileged, so says the progressive. The people who have stood up for the underprivileged, that's pretty comfortable for a lot of library workers and a lot of librarians and a lot of library trustees. The people I cannot stand are those who are indifferent to the oppression of women, minorities, and the poor. I get it. I totally get it. It's like right in my wheelhouse personally. And well, the thing I'm going to come back to in a moment is what happens if we're misaligned. with our city council or our neighbors or our school committee or our legislators. And yet we're both hoping to help. The conservative idiom, my heroes are people who stood up for Western values. This is interesting because the barbarians at the gate, I think that was actually the title of a book, and yet our institutions are one of the most conservatory kinds of institutions available for people. And the people and I'm saying they because I'm not one of them, the people I cannot stand if I'm a conservative are people who are indifferent to the assault on moral virtues and traditions that are the foundation of our civilization. And there are times when the programming that we do at our libraries and the collections that we develop and the displays we put up at different times of the year might look like the barbarians are storming the gate. And yet the explanation behind how do we want to treat each other, who do we want to be, doesn't need to change. Our behavior doesn't need to change, but perhaps how we explain it needs to change. Likewise, there's a libertarian narrative that says my heroes are the people who have stood up for individual rights, and the people I cannot stand as a libertarian are the people who are indifferent to the government taking away people's ability to make their own choices. And folks, you are the government. In fact, in the far right now, we're seeing some interesting rhetoric even about schools where they're not calling them public schools anymore. They're calling them government schools in order to put a wedge between, well, the idea that all taxes are theft and that people have just total self-determination. Yeah, I would like to understand the difference between a hand up and a hand out when most people who actually, they're not given handouts in libraries, they're given a lot of hands up. They're lowering barriers. You're lowering barriers all the time. And in schools, you're helping students succeed for self-attainment, and yet we keep tripping up on the language. And we keep letting, well, if you're not a progressive yourself, you might think it's the progressive's fault, and I do too, because I am one. What happens if you're at odds or variant from your audience that you're talking to about support building, either about activism in the short game or advocacy in the long game, your funding partners, your decision makers? I'm not asking you to change any of your stripes, but I am suggesting that we might need to tell a little bit of a different story sometimes to accomplish the same set of goals. It's an interesting process. We've run campaigns in communities that are red states and blue states, rural, suburban, urban. There's no difference in the data that OCLC a couple years ago put together. The From Awareness to Funding study, 2008, 2018, they asked American voters, would you vote yes for the library? If the XYZ public library is on the ballot, would you vote yes? And the people who said they would vote yes for the library automatically. The people who said, I'm not sure if I'm going to vote yes or not, tell me more. The people who are like, I got some sincere questions or suspicions about where the taxes are going. The folks who were like, nope, I'm not going to do it. Well, except for the people who said, nope, I'm never going to vote for taxes. There was no difference between Republicans and Democrats, men and women, race, ethnicity, gender, household income, or educational attainment. The problems that we run into are often about our political lenses and our narratives around heroes and villains. We've done it in those red states, we've done it in blue states to equal measure, and I'm glad about that. It also makes me scratch my head sometimes. All right, how people are listening to us is definitely how we are. Well, if we're going to start an activism campaign that's short and necessary to either avert crisis or seize an opportunity, or if we're going to start a long-term advocacy campaign to build power through relationships to make policy fundamental changes, we have to understand how people are wired to listen to us. And any work that MLA wants to do, the legislative committee is going to need to go through, well, there's 4 different lenses with 4 different aspects of it, and I want to take you through it real quick. So, potential supporters. There's essentially 4 types of folks who are going to support you. This is activism first, it's advocacy second, but it starts with relational supporters. Imagine a bullseye. Relational supporters, people who know libraries, who know librarians, who have some sort of an identification of self. The people who back in the day, those of you who are old enough to remember the Geek the Library campaign, they had a lifestyle that was facilitated, supported, realized through the library. They know librarians. They're the people at a cocktail party who are like, wow, you work in a library, tell me everything. Rather than the people who are like, wait a minute, I thought everything was on the internet. There's not a lot of them. In activism, they're the first ones we have to activate because the legitimacy of an activism campaign is established by the fact that the people who care the most about libraries are showing up for libraries. There's another kind of supporter next to ring out, the ideological supporters. These are people who take a lot longer to come around. They are pre-aligned with what libraries do and who librarians are, but they are rather, well, you're not in the top 5 like you are for the relational supporters on the issues that they matter. Now, you're certainly not top 10. You might be top 20 or top 25, but these people are ideologically potentially aligned. They care about literacy. Libraries aren't their jam. They care about the whole life of the child, and they don't necessarily see summer reading because they're more aligned with sports and recreation or the arts and culture or STEM or whatever, and they don't see you. They might be aligned around a livable community, a thriving community, a prosperous community, and they don't quite get it because nobody's connected the dots for them, and it takes a long time. But they're the ones in an advocacy situation who are going to be with you the longest, and who are going to be with you the deepest. The relational supporters are already with you, but the ideological supporters are the ones who, once they have a conviction of their heart or their head or their gut, they're the ones who make the difference and build the big tent of the coalition to co-create a future together. There's a third kind of supporter, the ring out, relational, ideological, aversionary supporters. These are the people who, in activism campaigns, are well, I said relational supporters have to be, triggered first or brought along first, but aversionary supporters need to be triggered. They need to be triggered because they tend to be the ones who are like, this is good money after bad. Why are we screwing this up this time? What are we doing wrong in society? They want to cut the library. What kind of crazy? How do I help? They want to do what at the school? No, 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 no. No, tell me what to do and I'll do it because we don't want to be stupid. And I'm not being flip here. This is the kind of disposition that an aversionary supporter has because they want to avoid bad outcomes. In activism, they're the ones that we are like, hey, sign this petition or the world's going to end, or sign this petition and we will seize the day. They, in an advocacy campaign situation, in a longer term situation, are the ones who actually need to hear about, well, relational supporters love plan A. And ideological supporters understand plan A. Plan A, if we get the money, we will do X, Y, and Z for people or place. Aversionary supporters want to see, okay, that's nice to hear about plan A. Everybody talks about plan A. Plan A is great. What about plan B? What happens if you don't get the money? It's not that they're ghoulish in any way, shape, or form, or like looking for trouble. They're just wired to be like, okay, how can I help fix a problem or avoid disaster? Plan B is in some way, shape, or form a problem or a disaster. The fourth kind of supporter is somebody who's an access supporter. These are folks in politics who are the ones who go out for like the $10,000 plate dinner so they can sit next to Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or President Obama or whatever. And we don't have a lot of them in libraries. Though some of your bigger foundations and some of your bigger friends groups and some of your legacy families certainly have it. I don't know how many of your libraries are named after a family that's too rich to use the place. They're your access supporters. They would like to have a badge or praise or feedback or some sort of gratitude. And God bless them. I like to give it to them all day long. And I'd like to see more of them. They'll show up when you ask, but they have to be rewarded in a particular way. And you don't start campaigns without having that kind of idea in place already. Those 4 kinds of supporters, keep them in mind. Then, how are those 4 kinds of supporters potentially listening to you? What's their filter? What's the thing that resonates with them? Is it about people? Is it about place? Is it about data? Is it about concerns? because there's a big difference between somebody who's wired to be compassionately engaged about a population or a group of people or one particular person. We do a lot of good compassion stories in libraries. And we helped some kid learn to read so she could read to learn. Now she's going to college. She's the first person in her family. Isn't that lovely? It sure is. And yet, that's not the only type of supporter who wants to be relationally, ideologically, or versionarily, or access aligned with you. The compassionately engaged is great, and it's only one potential way that a human being would listen to you. Because there's a lot of people out there who are wired around pride, pride of place. There's a big issue around, well, I mean, I don't want to live in a boring place personally. Hi, nice to see you. I'm John. I don't live in a boring place. I don't live in a place that isn't thriving. I want families to be successful. I want businesses to be successful. I want people to find the health information they need. I want the community connections. I want them to be able to like not be isolated and in a prosperous place where people have food on the table and they're able to have self-determination. I want to live in an interesting, thriving, and prosperous place. It's nice that you teach people how to read, folks. I think that that's important. You're kind of a proxy for my compassion, but what I want is good infrastructure. And somebody's got to tell me that that's what the library does. Or on campus for K-12, go Tigers, man. I want that. That's what I want. I want that community that is teaching my students, not even necessarily my students, but those students to be whole people, sure, but to be prosperous people, to build that community that means that we're not going to move away when we graduate. Compassion and pride are key drivers for activism campaigns and for advocacy campaigns. The third one, the data-driven people, are not as activism focused because there's not the kind of time. You can sometimes cipher data very quickly to them, but generally speaking, advocacy campaigns rather than activism campaigns are where the data people are at. And a lot of data people are also elected officials or in charge of grant making organizations or are the advisors to large family foundations. Data people are not uncompassionate, nor are they uninterested in place, but their filter, the way that they listen, is with the data first. You might have heard this story before, but I'm going to tell it again. It's the sports person. My father-in-law, the sports guy, watches a lot of ESPN. He's also an accountant by trade, a bookkeeper by trade. He's an umpire. He plays 16-inch softball. In fact, I think I've got, yes, the no glove softball Hall of Fame. He's in the Hall of Fame for being an umpire for softball. He calls balls and strikes for fun. This guy watches everything on ESPN until 2 o'clock in the morning. The next morning he gets up, he goes to get the newspaper, he reads the box scores. He wants to make sure that he knows what's going on. His two favorite teams are the Chicago White Sox, my apologies, and whoever is playing the Chicago Cubs that day. All right? Those are his two favorite teams. What he does is he reads the box scores because he wants to make sure he's got all the data. But then what he does is so important in an activism context, yes, in an advocacy campaign for sure, is he turns the page and he reads the stories about the team and about the management and about the decisions that are made at the front office or the plays that are called and somebody in a slump or somebody in a streak. Or I don't watch a lot of sports, so I'm out of ideas here about what happens. But the filter of the RBIs or the ERAs or the other statistics that exist is just know what the team is up to. And he cannot respond adequately, compassionately, or full of pride, go Bears, without having that understanding of data. And your politicians and elected officials and city managers and town, like the town intelligentsia in a lot of places is the same way. Everybody's got a good story about helping a kid learn to something or another, read, self-actualize, learn how to dance. Yeah, everybody's got a good story about how, like, if we only invested a couple of bucks in a, I don't know, you tell me, a green space, maybe some new planters out here. Everybody have a real pride filled. No, show me the inputs and the outputs, and then tell me about what the outcomes could be or were. Tell me about the team who did it. And then the last group of people in terms of the filters for how they listen. Right now, we are going to be in an environment where concerns and fears that are driven post COVID are going to be in play for a while. Post disaster, we've done a lot of campaigns at EveryLibrary with communities post disaster. It's been New Orleans after the floods, um, Cedar Rapids, Iowa after the floods. Um, oh, fires. We've done fires. We've done post riots. The it's not PTSD. It is legitimate concerns, and not to suggest PTSD is a legitimate situation. Forgive me if I don't need to apply it for one moment. It totally is, but there's a group of people who want to hear about library-shaped solutions to problems and librarian-enacted solutions to problems. And if they hear platitudes, they're going to tune you out. A lot of them are grant makers. A lot of them are putting good money into programs, projects, infrastructure that have an opportunity to demonstrate that they have the capacity to do it. And if it's all talking points or toolkits, it doesn't resonate with them. They have to understand that you also understand how sincere and severe it truly is. How do we fill gaps? How do we close gaps? And not just in a talking point or bromide sort of way. All right. So we've got the four types of supporters. We got the four ways that people listen. Now, everybody's got a little admixture of all this, but it's predominant. Why people listen. There are four reasons that people listen. Um, two of them are really important, and we've already addressed them. This all comes from another book. It's called The Political Brain. It's by a fellow named Drew Weston. It's brilliant. Please don't read it before bed. He talks about why people are activated for politicians and for campaigns and for parties. He talks about both the positive side of politics as well as the negative side of politics. But his thesis is essentially that there are four factors that build parties and movements or bring people out for a candidate. The first two are much more important than the second two. In fact, if I had a very large slide, I'd have a very big gap between these four things. At shared values and shared identity, big gap then. But shared values and shared identity are what drive a campaign because, and you see this with the books that candidates write. In fact, the next big open race, it would be fascinating for the big political polling firms and CNN and Fox and everybody just to ask the librarians, hey, what's circulating right now amongst the candidates? Because the book, more than the speech or the anything else, the book, if you love what the candidate is talking about, it does take a village. Dreams of my father, make America great again. If you love it, you embrace it. And if you don't, you literally throw it across the room because it offends you. And we come together as party. We come together in a cause based on our identity as people. Now, identity politics is not what I'm talking about here. It's pernicious. But who are we together? And does the campaign represent my identity and values in a particular way? I bring this up because in activism campaigns, as I said before, it's about who we are and what do we believe, and is it offended or supported? And in advocacy campaigns, it's about what resources do we need to support a framework where our values, vision, and mission are being realized. The particulars, though, in an advocacy context, you might spend more time on the particulars of policy. In activism, you might spend a lot less time on the particulars, but really looking to drive home the conversation with those folks to say, who are we? What do we believe? Yes, personal characteristics in campaigns of a candidate, the characteristics of an organization, your professional reputation. I mean, people vote with their feet about membership all the time. The characteristics of the organization, does Is there something about that group or that person that I admire? Yes, that helps build the base. Yes, that helps attract members and other well wishers. It's also like, well, one person's hero is another person's villain, and for every Bill Clinton, I'll raise you a Donald Trump, and vice versa. Then again, the specific policies and the specific policies are the curious part for a lot of library campaigns. That's what we really spend a lot of time on because that's our responsibility. How many hours, what kind of staff, what kind of collection, what kind of technology, what kind of square footage. All of the features are a lot of and the devil's in the details, and 364 days of the year, that's what it's all about. But most of the time, people want to support a cause-based organization or a candidate that they can just simply say, yeah, when I'm not paying attention, are you going to do what you said you're going to do? All right. The fourth part of this, the stories component. There are really four stories. And the third story on that list is mostly the stories that we've been comfortable telling before in both our advocacy and our activism, whether we've been doing it poorly or properly. It's the stories about people that we care about or the place that we call home, because if it does establish a common concern, we helped some kid learn how to read so she could read to learn, and then she's going to college now. She's the first one in her family. Isn't that great? But really, it's not the reason to give you any more money in particular. There's only two reasons to give you more money. One of two reasons to give you more money. The first two stories, stories of success that demonstrate your competency. We have been good at doing a particular thing and we would like to scale it up. Or we've been good at doing a particular thing and we want to replicate it. Stories of success that demonstrate your competency says we've had 12 families doing story time, but we really need to have 50. So let's scale it up. We need the funding in order to put our competencies to deeper work. We have a common set of values about this. We have a common identity about it. We have a compassion or a pride of place that drives it. The data shows it. We are standing in a gap right now. Whatever that particular situation is, let's scale it up. Or we've been really good at story time. Let's replicate our success to do business support services. You're fundable because you're competent, or you're fundable because you have integrity. And the stories of failure are, when they're true, are extremely important to tell because your different supporters want to hear the truth from you. Nobody wants to just hear, well, we're so wonderful and we have a little bit of an issue and we could use a little bit more money. Stories of failure, either current failure or impending failure. Failure either at the library or failure in the community that offends your value system, that breaks your mission, that clouds your vision. That failure, the only way that you're going to get funded to fix failure is if you have the integrity to do it properly. And so when I go back to the idea that activism and advocacy both require verbs and first person singular or first person plural stories, I did this work. We need these resources. I would like to do this work. We need these resources. Averting failure or fixing failure. Forestalling failure, if we don't get these resources, we're going to have a problem in our community. Or if we get the resources, we can take care of the thing that's currently broken. There's no other reason to give you money. There's no other reason to give you money. And this goes for schools, K-12, higher ed, public libraries, anywhere. Stories about people you care about, that's a nice story. Great, tell me that later. And tell me another story too, occasionally, about why you do what you do, because what that does is it finds a common cause between you and the people you're talking to. But those are more marketing. All right. If you're with me still, then we're going to have a good chat on Friday the 25th. I hope you are with me still. I don't want to take too much more time. I want to run you through real quick if we're going to be a good partner of yours here at EveryLibrary, how we would do it for activism, and then how we would do it for advocacy. There's some guiding principles when we come back around to activism first. First, The first principle is that users are not going to be your supporters. They hardly ever are. In fact, you've got a lot of users at libraries who are not enfranchised to vote. They don't have a political voice. They are themselves at a moment of crisis or transition and cannot respond. They actually might be politically aligned against taxes. I mean, there's a lot of people who are users of the library who are writing manifestos against the government. Supporters is what we're into around activism. So activists in any campaign that you're going to be doing at MLA, whether we're with you or not, my encouragement to you is to focus on identifying and cultivating and empowering people using digital and real world tools. That it's focused not on building users. People become users if they're supporters. Some of them do, but in order to have somebody be a valid supporter of the library, of your call to action, you can't ask them to change their lifestyle. If they haven't used the library since they were 14 years old themselves, that's like asking them, why don't you quit smoking and then you can support the library? Why don't you start reading? Why don't you start coming to the library instead of buying your own books? Why don't you start doing something different? No, let's talk about a value system where the librarians, the library workers, the school librarians are doing the right kind of work. Again, activism has to allow for action. It has to solicit action. You don't have a marketing campaign without action attached to it. And this might sound harsh, but Geek the Library, Libraries Transform, Read. I mean, if 10,000 people walk by the Read posters that's hanging above the drinking fountain, they're like, yes, we should be reading. How can I help? And there's no ask on there. How? But what? Then why do we tell them to read? We must allow people to participate in the activism based on their budget, their personal budget. They might have a personal budget as a donor. Listen, folks, I'm never going to get into a dinghy and go out and join people on Greenpeace saving the whales personally. I'm never going to do it. I give them $15 a month. Some guy hit me up one time on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and I was walking downtown. He said, "Hey, we are raising money. We want donors to support Greenpeace because we believe in the whales. Do you believe in whales? Yes, I do. So here's how we're going to stop them whaling. Oh my God, you're fantastic. What do I have to do? Cut me a check. Okay, so you don't need me to get in a dinghy. No, I do not. Cut me a check. I will tell you about how I've saved the whales or the seals or something else in the environment." Every big issue advocacy organization, except for EveryLibrary and libraries, mind you, but every big issue advocacy organization is afraid to, inside libraries is afraid to ask for donations. And yet it's one of the singular ways that people put their value system to work. Activism needs to ask people to participate as a volunteer. That might be signing postcards to send to members of Congress. It might be literally volunteering to organize or support or hand out bottles of water at the 5K fun run. And they have to be able to participate as a doer. So if I believe in reading, or if I think that, yes, I want to geek the library, or I would like to respond to this, how do I do it? There has to be a way for them to put their heart or their head or their gut to work and put their good name behind it. Sign a petition, send an email, refer us, share it, etc. Activists always collect contact information. If we're going to work together, this is a big thing. Besides donations, it's the second most uncomfortable thing for libraries. And we need to get over it because an opt-in is very powerful. And somebody says, yes, I believe in this. You've been telling me that you believe in it too as an organization. I would like to be a part of it. Here's my contact information. Then we can work on empowering them over time. We have to create these pathways to involvement that I was describing already. It has to be authentic in our activism, but it also has to be urgent. If we do work together, there's going to be a real interest on our part here at EveryLibrary in helping you understand the authenticity, the urgency, and then ways to segment the audience that you're trying to talk to based on those other principles that we discussed before about how they listen, how are they wired, what's their political voice and speech. We have to ask people. not just to be a part of our activities and our activism, but what do they believe? What do they feel? What's their hope? What are their concerns? This is good principled work. It takes time to get good at being an activist, but once you become good at being an activist, as an organization, as MLA, you can move. Well, they always talk about the Archimedes principle of if I have a long enough lever and a place to stand, I can move the world. Nobody ever talks about the fulcrum, the message that you're trying to convey, the change you're trying to make is essentially what you push against. There's an engagement approach to activism that moves people from being unaware to being an observer of what you're doing. And you have to be actively marketing and advertising and doing outreach in order to make people who are otherwise unaware but favorably disposed to look at you and go, huh, what are they doing over there? That looks like it's value system aligned to me. It looks like something I would hope to get done in the world if I could do it myself. So I might cut them a check for it, but let me see what they're doing. Hey, I could actually become a supporter of this in one of those couple of different ways because I love libraries. I like libraries. I'm rationally ignorant but favorably disposed to libraries. And yet they've given me, then thank you for giving me, as a potential activist, a pathway to move from just being an emotional or ideological supporter into actually putting my budget of time, money, or my good name to work. This pathway is done, we do it every day in every library. We do it for issues um, large and small, sometimes as small as one school district where there's one school librarian whose job's under threat, or one zip code where the budget is before the voters or the town council or the town hall meeting. People have those budgets. How do you build a situation where you can help them activate them? And that marketing is a key component of what we're doing here. Marketing, excuse me, if we don't spend a little bit of money to break through the noise, you're not going to be a very successful advocate these days, nor are you going to be a very successful activist these days. There's so much noise out there. So devoting a little bit of budget to sharing your value system, your mission, and your vision, and asking people to participate is absolutely key. Activism, I've already said this, my apologies. This was a repeat on the slide, but to reinforce, everything for an audience, for activism, it goes from the library to an issue that's interesting to a particular segment of your audience to help motivate them to take an action. Advocacy is entirely different. This is the short, sharp, occasionally repeated, either avert crisis or seize opportunity activism. You find audiences, folks, in a couple of different ways. Some of them are opted in, some of them are discoverable. I want to let you know before we get started, if we're going to get started together, that we've got a lot of experience, because right now you might be feeling like all we have are a couple of relational supporters. How do you find the rest of them? It's totally doable. It's at our fingertips. And people are eager across the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to take a principled stand. Let me skip these up here. Advocacy. The principles around advocacy. Again, if we're going to work together, EveryLibrary and MLA, and we're having a good conversation right now. Also, I hope with MSLA, meeting with the board and some of the advocate groups there as well. We do this work with a couple of different states. We're working right now with the state of Delaware and the Delaware Library Association on building a statewide campaign. We're working with the New Jersey School Librarians Association, the Pennsylvania School Librarians Association on some statewide campaigns as well. The principles that we put to work on advocacy are different. It's about, well, both require marketing between advocacy and activism, but the kind of marketing that you do with advocacy, again, it's not to build users. People will become users as they are supporters, but it's really intended to, well, Marketing to build use looks like, hey, Tuesday, 10 a.m. story time, bring your kids. Miss Nancy, who's lovely and would loves your kids, wants to be help your kid learn to read so she can read to learn, and will be your partner as a parent or guardian in your child's future. 10 a.m. Tuesday, story time, bring your kids. That's an important bit of marketing that you have to do, for example, as a library. But the more important version as an advocacy organization, and also for some of the background radiation of activism to establish some of that identification of supporters, is to market what happened yesterday. Yesterday, in town, we had families show up. It was a Tuesday for story time. And Miss Nancy, who's fantastic, helped letter shapes and numbers, first language literacy, parents as educators, blah, blah, blah. And we should have done not just the 12 that showed up, but the 50 other families that need it because we don't have enough resources. Or we did this yesterday and we are really good at it. And we're very proud to say that we're really good at it. And we'd like to do it at scale or replicate it across the community in different ways. Because on Tuesday, there's only a certain inventory of people who could show up. First off, they have to have kids of the right age and be available on Tuesday. There's a lot more humans who care about the idea that there's somebody in town doing this work. And they need to hear about what was done with a small amount of smart tax money. Everything else in the advocacy principles we can get into the details on as we go along. The big one, coalitions, are really the core of advocacy work, as we discussed earlier. The expertise that you bring as a librarian or a library worker allows you to do two things: to define what the potential outcomes could be and to define the negatives, because you know what will happen to communities and to people if you're not there to do it right. The tomorrow marketing, sure, great. Yesterday marketing, it's all about your impacts. Funding focused partnerships, again, advocacy work over the long haul, shared values, common mission, aligned vision. We're not talking about programmatic alignments. We're talking about organizational alignments with other organizations, agencies, stakeholder groups, MLA, individual libraries, school library programs. There's a lot of questions I have for the MLA Legislative Committee and the MLA leadership team about who else should care across Massachusetts about the work that libraries and librarians are doing. There's a whole framework here around advocacy, not activism, but advocacy that builds power over time, shared values that are expressed in policy or in budgets or in regulation or in authorizations. Yeah, there's a whole thing here about how we express our value system so that we can be identified. And a lot of websites for a lot of organizations and associations are about process as opposed to what you believe. So if there's an opportunity even to see how you are potentially qualified to be a good partner in a vision, mission, and value aligned project with another organization, we might want to consider that. All right. Fundamentally, all the work around advocacy comes down to defining in that shared value system what happens if you're empowered to do the work and what happens if you're not. And helping you folks potentially think through what that looks like in terms of empowerment. Again, legislation, budgets, authorizations. All right. I think I'm going to stop there. I've been talking for a long time. What I want to be able to do is help think through on the 25th when we get together whether or not there's a shared project here. There's a lot more to discuss. There's a lot more in the details. But I think and I hope that we can get something done together. EveryLibrary is ready to stand with you, to work with you, to amplify, if you will, help amplify your legitimate agendas. There's a whole process around policy that needs to be explored. There's a whole process around the PR that aligns you properly for advocacy and for activism. The whole process around politics that gets you to move people from being unaware to all the way through to being activists, to move potential partners, should be partners, into a place where they're actually in coalition with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation on the 25th. Thank you for taking a few minutes with me here tonight to think through this stuff in terms of the theory behind what we're doing. And if there's a place to go together, it could be a good conversation. Thanks very kindly, folks. I'll see you on the 25th. Bye bye.